You are going to love this episode with Todd Mussselman. He's one of the most impactful people I've ever met. We talk about his belief that no one ever gets a feeling wrong, the important difference between being interested and being committed, why there is very little capital T truth in the world, and why the best question you can ask a human being is, what else? Hey, Todd, welcome to the podcast.
Morning. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for so long, Todd, because as I may have mentioned in the intro, I mean, this guy had the most impact that I think a speaker has ever had on me. I spent 3 hours with him, not just by myself, with a small group of people about a year ago. And I just took so many notes. It was just, you're going to be blown away by Todd. But it took us a while to get this going, but the anticipation and the patience is worth it for me, because I'm just so happy to be here with you today, Todd.
I appreciate that.
So let me tell you a little bit more about Todd Mussselman. Todd is a lead trainer, motivational speaker, and executive coach, and he's famous for producing effective results through one primary mechanism: fierce, focused, and supportive conversations. He's also a musician and leads the folk rock band 𝙁𝙬𝙚𝙬. I've got that right, correct, Todd?
Yep.
All right. After working in his family business for more than 25 years, Todd chose to become a coach and a trainer and studied under master coach and best-selling author Steve Chandler. We'll talk about Steve, but if you want to find out more about Steve, go to his name, 𝙁𝙬𝙚𝙬𝙚.com. And you're going to learn a lot about Todd, but if you want to go to his website after the podcast, it's his name, Todd Mussselman, Musselman, 2 S's, 1 N, .net, for a full overview of everything he does. So Todd, I start every show with the same simple question, and that is, how did it happen for you?
Gosh, that's a big question. I mean, there's a couple big chapters in my life I could point to. I think as it relates to this podcast, I'll go for the one that's most relevant. So as you might mention, Mike, I grew up in a family business called 𝘰𝙧 Sportswear, and I worked with all of my siblings and my parents. I have 4 siblings. My parents, we had 220 employees, and it was a fantastic experience. I love working with my family. I didn't really love the job that I did for our family business. I was a sales rep, and I didn't really love it. So I spent the last 10 years working inside my family's business, wanting to do what I'm doing now, but I didn't have the courage. Fear got in the way, specifically the fear of not being good enough got in my way. I played small for 10 years and languished in a lot of upset and disappointed myself that I just couldn't muster the courage to push through the fear to, and start a career that I felt like I knew I was called to do. And then whatever you want to call it, maybe divine intervention intervened for me. And in 2008, my family, we lost our business to bankruptcy after 42 years. And out of that loss came an opportunity to reinvent myself at 47. And it was a long journey. We spent 8 months inside of what's called special assets in the Wells Fargo environment. And it was super challenging. A couple of my family members suffered mightily. I certainly suffered as well. In fact, I had one of the best pity parties you've ever seen. But it's a long story. But for me, the breakthrough came when one of my brothers was in distress. He was the CEO, and he was in a lot of distress. And because of his distress, I got into action, and I went down and supported my brother. I live in Steamboat, Colorado, but the business is in Denver. And for 3 months, he and I walked a journey that was really, really amazing. And, you know, it was one of the hardest things I've ever been through. It was really hard to watch my brother go through it. Uh, and yet I'm so grateful for all that pain and suffering, because, you know, we grew collectively as a family. Um, you know, my experience is that, for me anyway, all of the growth in my life has come from when I'm, I've had some challenges. And that's where it comes. It's never fun, but, you know, that's where it happened for me. And, once we lost the business, I kind of had no choice but to reinvent myself. So at 47, um, it's a bit of a longer story, but I ended up hiring Steve to be my mentor for a year. Steve Chandler, as you mentioned, he's an amazing man. And, I was his apprentice for a year, and that experience really kind of launched me into, my coaching and speaking career, and, incredibly grateful for that, experience and opportunity to work with, such a gifted man. And, so yeah, that's kind of how it happened. It's a little more to that story, but for sure, out of the ashes, I came, you know, through it, and, it was an amazing experience.
Hmm. And how is your brother now?
Mark is doing great. All my siblings are doing well. They've all, like me, had to kind of reinvent themselves. You know, we grew up in that family business, so it's all we knew, really, most of us. And, so Mark is, in the same line of work that I do. He's also a coach. He doesn't really speak, but he coaches a lot of, CEOs, and really supports people, in that realm. And he's a very gifted leader. He's a great leader, and, great human being, actually. So he's doing, I think, very well right now. I think he would say that.
And Todd, you mentioned, I'm glad to hear that. And you mentioned that you'd had this desire. I'm going to call it a desire. You may call it something else, for 10 years leading up to that, you know, the business bankruptcy event. What, but you were playing, you said, you know, you played small for 10 years, even though you had this. So I'm curious to dig into that a little bit. Like, what was making you think that you wanted to do this, and what was preventing you from doing it?
Yeah. Well, it's two of my best friends on the planet. One is a very high level coach, and one is a very gifted national speaker. And they had both, in their own way, been after me to do this for a very long time. I've been through some personal growth seminars where I watched the facilitators with just a sense of awe, and also came away thinking, I mean, I'd love to do that. I don't know how I would do that, but I'd love to facilitate, you know, meetings and speak. And, so that was the awareness that created, you know, my desire. Coupled with that, I knew that I wasn't meant to sell clothing. I mean, I didn't care. I was, my more fun, you know, fun aspect of my job was leading people inside the organization, which was really fun. But my last role was to sell. And so, I think in some ways, Mike, I got intoxicated by comfort. Um, I've come to realize that comfort, I'm not a fan of comfort, honestly. I mean, I get it, but, um, fear loves comfort. Fear loves comfort. It just sucks you into being complacent. At least it has me. And man, I got complacent. I knew, you know, what to do and how to do it, and just enough to make enough, you know, a good income. And I wasn't growing at all.
Hmm.
It's in the discomfort of life. That's where we grow. I've never grown when I was comfortable, but, I got really comfortable, and that complacency just, you know, essentially got in my way of really taking a bold action and making a bold request, which I've come to see are really powerful attributes of, living a fulfilling life. At least to me, is the willingness to make bold requests of others and yourself. And, so that's I wasn't willing to do that. So I just played small.
Hmm. And so this event finally causes you to, well, it takes away your small game, I guess, because
Yes.
the game's
Yeah.
gone.
Correct.
So you reach out to you connect with Steve somehow. Tell me about that, because I'm thinking that's a very proactive. At least it seems to me, proactive thing to do. I like, even myself and a lot of people I run into think, well, I could be a good coach, right? But we don't do anything to like get trained up to be a good coach. We just think, well, and I'm talking for myself, well, my business experience and my life experience and my leadership experience has prepared me pretty well to be a good coach to people like me. You decided to do something different.
Yeah, and listen, I would love to take credit for having the wisdom to reach out to Steve Chandler. Unfortunately, that's not quite how it went. It's actually kind of a hilarious story. So after we lost the business, and to be quite honest, the new ownership kept us on. You were founders of the business, and we were incredibly valuable. But every day I walked in that building, I was out of my integrity because I didn't care. I wasn't trying. I just was, and it was an awful mess for me. I mean, my spirit was just destroyed because I was out of my integrity every day. So I finally ended up quitting, honestly. So, and so then I started down this path of speaking and coaching. And I remember a very funny conversation I had with my mom about 3 months in. I remember she called me and said, so how's that speaking and coaching thing going? I said, oh my God, Mom, I love it. It's so fun, except for one thing. And she said, what's that? I said, well, Mom, so far I haven't made a dime. But other than that,
other than that, I love it. It's great.
What the problem was, I had 3 young children, and they were hungry and they wanted to play hockey and go skiing, and that cost money. So I honestly, Steve, Mike, I decided to quit. I just I convinced myself that I was a joke, that this was a joke, that I wasn't meant for this. And the day that I decided to quit, I'll never forget, I was walking through a back alley in Steamboat where I live, and my best friend, Steve McGee, who is the very high level coach, called me, and he'd been after me. So he said, oh, how's it going? I said, well, it's interesting you called, Steve, because I just decided today I'm going to quit. He goes, oh, no, why? And I said, well, because I suck. Because I money, and I said, yeah, buddy, I just don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea how to get clients or anything. He goes, well, Todd, everybody goes through that. I go, well, you're kidding me. He goes, no, everybody that's done this goes through that phase, and then you break through. And I said, well, that's helpful to know, but I have to make money. I can't do this anymore. He said, well, it's interesting, that we're having this conversation, because the reason I called is there's a guy in Phoenix that's offering an apprenticeship, and I think you should throw your hat in the ring, because if you could work with him, it would change everything. I said, okay, well, so I did. I contacted Steve, and I sent him not a resume per se, but just some background material. He called me, sent me a book called Reinvent Yourself, which is one of the best books. I read it in like literally 3 or 4 hours. It was so awesome. And I'm like, oh my God, I love this guy. And then we had a long conversation, about 2 hours. And, Steve loved that I'd been through a bankruptcy, and he loved that I was a professional musician, because that would make the speaking thing a little easier probably. And then I didn't hear from him for a week. And then he called me back and said, all right, I've decided you're my guy. I'm like, oh my God, that's awesome. And it was awesome, except for one thing. To work with Steve, there was a $50,000 fee. and I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, like none. And so I did something incredibly unusual for me at that time anyway. I made a bold request. And I called one of my best friends, who's a venture capitalist, and
hey everyone, if you like what I'm doing with this podcast and want to participate in more of the things I'm thinking about and exploring, subscribe to my newsletter today. It's super simple. Just go to 𝙀𝙘𝙀𝙗.com right now, put in your email, and you will get the very next issue. It's short, thoughtful, and designed to inspire, activate, and maximize the greatness in you.
I said, so Kevin, I got a crazy question. Have you ever invested in a person before? He goes, no, what the hell are you talking about? So I told him what was going on, and he said, well, all right. I mean, I'm intrigued. What do you need? And I took a big gulp, Mike, and I said, 15,000. And my amazing, beautiful friend said, you got it. Didn't even hesitate. So I went over and I got that, and I got pieced together another $10,000. And I'll never forget it. I remember dropping that check for half which is what we agreed, Steve and I agreed to, half down, half monthly. And I put that check in the mail on a Friday. And when I put it in the mailbox, I literally almost threw up on the mailbox. I was so scared. I was leveraging literally everything that I had.
I'm nervous for you right now. Just telling this story, I'm nervous.
Yeah. So what was amazing, Mike, is I dropped that check in on a Friday, and by the next Wednesday, I had 4 paying clients. And I did nothing different except for one thing. I committed. I went from being interested to committed. And that is a big distinction that I work inside of in my life. And when I coach people, one of my favorite questions to any coaching client or any speaking environment is, what are you interested in? What are you committed to? And who are you committed to? I mean, really committed. And I had realized I was only interested in speaking coaching. I had never committed. I hadn't put any skin in the game. And then I put that $25,000 of skin in the game. And, my experience of life is that the universe, whatever you want to call it, God, some people call it God, it never gets behind you when you're interested in something. It only gets behind you when you're committed to something. And so I'm pretty sure everybody on this phone call knows exactly what I'm talking about. I'm pretty sure everybody on this phone call could think of a time where they went from being interested to something to committed. And the minute they committed, doors started opening up they never saw. And that's exactly what happened to me. So I'll finish the story because it's kind of funny. So right away, I get these 4 paying clients out of nowhere. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I started off pretty fast when I started working with Steve. And it was going great. And then about 7 months in, I started noticing my sales pipeline was a little scarce, and fear showed up for me, and I got a little scared. And the day that I noticed my sales pipeline was not looking like I wanted to was the day I had my monthly meeting with Steve. And so we were on this meeting, and I started hinting around that since I paid him so much money, maybe it was time he threw me a referral or two. I hinted around, but I never made a bold request. And I tell you what, Steve Chandler is the king of bold requests. And finally, he picked up what was going on, and it pissed him off. Like I had never seen Steve like irritated with me, but he was agitated for sure. And then Steve Chandler changed my life in about 45 seconds. This is what he said. He said, Todd, I think I know where you're going with this, and I only have one thing to say to you. I said, what's that, Steve? He said, well, Todd, no one is coming. And I said to him, what do you mean by that? He said, I mean, no one is coming. I'm like, no one is coming? What the hell is he talking about? Oh, no one is coming to make my life easier or happier or more fulfilling. No one's coming to fill my pipeline. No one is coming. What Steve Chandler showed me to see in that moment was I was 100% responsible for my life and everything. And I mean 100% responsible. It was such a powerful gift. And, I love the whole kind of just the reality that no one is coming for any human being, that we are the architects of our own life. And if we want something to be different, our marriage, our health, our wealth, that's up to us by the choices we make. And it was just such a slap in the face and just woke me up. I'm, oh, yeah, if that pipeline doesn't look very good, it's up to me to fill it, not Steve Chandler. And so I got busy again, and I started filling it again. And so I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of the story. Now, one other thing that was interesting during this period is, Steve was amazing, but he never told me how to create a speaking career. He never told me anything. He just gave me some distinction to work in, but he never told me how to actually generate a speaking career. And I went out to lunch with one of my assistant when I worked at 𝙀𝙬, and I love her. Her name's Lori Kendall. She's just a gift to me. And we'd worked together for about 6 years, and I really adored her. And this is after we lost the business and everything. And we just went for coffee, and she was saying, well, how's it going? I'm like, I don't know. I can't seem to break through on the speaking thing. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, she started asking me, who do you want to speak to? And I'm like, well, I don't know. And then it dawned on me that I have a reverence for one particular category of human beings more than any other category of human beings. They're called moms. I have a huge reverence for moms. I think moms are the most amazing people on the planet, bar none. And then it just dawned on me, what if I put 4 or 5 moms in a room and I came and did this training for them? And so I did 29 times. 29 times I did 3-hour talks for groups of anywhere from 5 to 10 moms, 100% free. Didn't charge them anything. But during those 29 times, I learned what stories worked, what stories didn't, what distinctions worked, what distinctions didn't. And I created my entire speaking career out of those 29 talks that I gave to those amazing human beings called moms. And oh, by the way, most of them have husbands who a lot of them run companies. And that's how I started. So that was just kind of I've never heard of anything like that before. It was just such an ad hoc creation in the moment with Lori and I just brainstorming, and that's how it happened.
And okay, I didn't see that coming. I don't think you told us about that when as part of the story you told us. So Steve didn't help you put it together.
No.
Was your mom one of the moms?
Nope. Lori was the first mom. Lori was a mom, and she put, I think, 7 more moms in the room that day. And then I invited them, if they had their own little group they wanted me to come talk to, and so that's how it happened. It just mushroomed. And it was fantastic. I had so much fun. I mean, I got my little flip charts and drove around Metro Denver and spoke to all these groups of moms. It was incredibly fun and rewarding, but only moms. I never spoke to anybody else but moms.
And the title of the talk, rough title or title of the talk that I went through with you was victim versus owner.
Yeah. Well, actually, the title of that talk, it is about that distinction, the victim versus the ownership mindset. But the title is The Vital Choice.
That's the vital choice. Okay.
Talk. And the reason that I title that, Mike, and it's a much longer explanation probably, but it's my experience that every human being is in a vital choice pretty much on a moment-to-moment basis. And the vital choice that I believe we're all engaged in on a moment-to-moment basis is at any moment in time, we're either coming from fear or coming from love. One of those two is running the show. And, in my parlance, my perspective, preoccupation and distraction are just manifestations of fear. They are fear. And, a lot of times they get in the way a lot. Preoccupation and distraction. They destroy relationships more than any other thing I know of. They destroy productivity. They destroy, fun. It's a longer conversation about the destructive nature of preoccupation and distraction. And so, when I go out and speak, one of my charges to everybody is, what if you chose love over fear 10% more often? Who would you be then? Because you can. I mean, we're born loving. What gets in the way of us being loving is fear a lot of times. So anyway, that's the title of the talk, The Vital Choice.
And was that the title that you started with these moms, or was it?
No.
So how did you develop? I'm wondering how you developed for your talk, the way that you talk to them versus the way you talk to us and, business owners and such.
I didn't develop the vital choice until COVID.
Oh, okay.
I reinvented that talk during COVID because, before COVID, it was a completely different talk. I had 2 flip charts and I'd do these distinctions, and I played a song or two on my guitar. I'd bring my guitar and I'd always sing. And then during COVID, singing over the internet doesn't really work out very well. It's horrible. So I stopped doing that. And in the process, I just completely revamped the talk. And now I talk about the 4 pillars of the ownership mindset. And I never had that before COVID. And out of that, that's where I invented the talk called The Vital Choice. Okay.
And I'm going to get into the 4 pillars in a moment. I'm glad that you brought that up. This, you might have said it. I don't know, but this interested versus committed thing, is like if for breakfast the chicken is interested and the pig is
Right.
committed, for
Right.
like eggs and bacon
Right.
sort of thing. But I'm wondering, when you ask people that question, you said you always ask people what they're interested in, what they're committed to, and who they're committed to. Are people able to answer that, Todd, do you find generally?
Well, yes, and it really has a lot of people dive into some pretty deep self-reflection, because my question is bigger than that. And I also make I use 4 areas that we tend to be interested but not committed. The first area is our jobs. Lots of people, I mean, lots meaning, I don't know, 10%, 15% of the people watching this podcast right now are only interested in their jobs. They're not committed. And
Hmm.
they know it. And so what that amounts to is every time they walk in their jobs, they just check a box and do enough to get by, but no more. And there's nothing wrong with that except for one thing: you're out of your integrity. And it sucks. I've been there, as I said, with my family business. And it's a not to be brutal, but it's kind of a god awful mess when you're just checking the box, doing enough to get by. And so some of the people on this call that are interested in their jobs are not committed. Some people on this call are interested but not committed into creating a better relationship at home with their spouse. And some of them might even talk a good game about, yeah, honey, I'd go see somebody if you make the call. I won't call, but if you call, I'll go see somebody, I guess. That's somebody that's interested but not committed in creating a better relationship at home.
Hmm.
Some people on this phone, on this call, no doubt are interested but not committed to being healthier. They talk about, their eating habits and changing that, or maybe an exercise regimen that they're going to do, but they don't, they're just interested. They don't commit to it and they stop. And some people on this phone call, Mike, are interested in pursuing a passion, but they're not committed. I'll give you an example of that one. As I said, I'm a professional musician. I'd say probably 25% of the time I finish a gig, I bet about 25% I have somebody come up to me and say something like this: "Oh my God, I have a guitar. I'm so interested in playing." And every time they say that to me, my heart just sinks for them. Because I know one thing: every time they go home and they look at that guitar that they've never picked up, there's only one thing that happens: their spirit just dives, because they're not they're not committed. They're just interested. And so I think it is a powerful question. And the only thing that's required to go from being interested to committed, it literally is one word. It's a very powerful word. It's called action. Actually picking up that guitar, or picking up that phone and calling the therapist, or actually getting recommitted to your jobs, whatever that is for you. That's all. Action is the only thing required to go from interested to committed. In fact, action is always the way out of the victim mindset. If you ever find yourself immersed in the victim mindset or stuck in the victim mindset, I think the most powerful question anybody could ask themselves is, what action could I take right now? And the more the uncomfortable the action, the better the result. That would be my experience anyway.
And Todd, you mentioned fear many, many times, and is it always fear that's keeping you from being committed?
Well,
Because I think I'm trying to think of the ways people would rationalize their way out of, no, it's not fear. It's, blame someone else. There's a million routes that I suppose you could take, right? But in your experience, is that what you think?
not to be brutal, and I don't know how you feel about this use of language, but that's just happy horse shit. Yes, it's always fear. To me, it's always fear.
Okay.
And if you distill it down, it's almost always the same fear, and that's the fear of not being good enough. I don't want to go to the gym because I'm overweight, or I'm out of shape, or whatever. I don't want to go to a therapist. My God, what would I make that mean about our relationship? That we don't have it all figured out, I could keep going. I don't want to pick that guitar up because I suck. And I don't want to push through all the plateaus you have to push through playing guitar to actually be decent. I don't want to do that. I just rather talk about playing guitar. It sounds way more cool than actually playing guitar. So to me, it's always the same fear, the fear of not being good enough, that crushes the human spirit.
And why is it that things that you could do, actions that you could take, like picking up the guitar, for example, all by yourself, that no one would see and hence no one would judge? Why is it that people take on the role of someone else, you know, telling them they suck or judging or whatever, instead of just being like, there's no danger here. Like I can take these actions, maybe not every action, but I can take these actions anonymously. I'm the only one who knows that I'm doing it. And I'm the only one who knows whether I'm good, whether I suck, whatever. And yet we still, why do people do that?
I think, as I said earlier, and again, guilty as charged, they're intoxicated by comfort.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to sit on a couch with a remote and turn a TV on than it is to pick up a guitar and push through that phase that you're going to suck. It's hard to do that. It's, I'm a big fly fisherman. You know how many times I hear people interested in fly fishing that never actually do it because it looks hard, and it is hard. And there is a curve that you got to push through. And in many ways, again, I'm on this phone call because my friend Steven had the belief and the love for me to just encourage me to keep going as a coach and a speaker. Don't stop. And if I hadn't had that phone call, we wouldn't be on this call for sure. I was definitely committed to quitting that day. I promise you. I had to make money, and then ironically, I gave all my money away to make money, which was hilarious. Even that, I guess it does sometimes boil. What do you want? What are you willing to do? Give up or change to get what you want. So, yeah.
And let's just get back to that for a second. What about your friend that you asked, have you ever invested in a person? Yeah. And he invested in you. What
he did. So interestingly enough, lots came from that. He instead of me paying him back, I ended up coaching him, and he's a dear friend of mine. But he was starting a brand new business and was up against it, and then he pulled me into the business. I started working with his business, and then pretty soon, out of this one request not only did I disappear the debt, but I actually created an income stream based on that request, because he started this business in Colorado, and I worked inside that business coaching a lot of people, and it turned out to be an amazing experience for him and I. He's still one of my dearest friends. And his business just sold recently, and super proud of him. And but it was a mutually beneficial relationship for sure that I didn't see coming. I just kind of desperate, and he's the one I knew had the most available cash, so that's where I went.
Bold request.
I really can't overstate that. As a coach, what I've noticed, I've worked with people that I would say live pretty amazing lives. Not all of them for sure, but some of them. And the one thread that I see of those people that I believe live amazing lives, whatever that means, they're pretty good at making bold requests consistently over and over again of others and themselves. They just ask for what they want. It's remarkable how similar they are in that regard, really. And for most of us, we're not willing to ask for what we want because we're afraid of rejection, which is just another, road down, I'm not good enough. But they don't see rejection the same as most people. They just see it as an opportunity for growth and expansion. It's bizarre. I can't even explain how they just plow through that quote unquote rejection or failure, and they just say, well, what can I learn from that one? Whereas most of us just sink into the I'm not good enough,
right.
realm soup.
I find that I have a mixture of both. Like when I first had the idea to make a bold request, I try to talk myself out of it.
Yeah.
And then it's like a filtering mechanism almost. Like if it keeps coming up when I'm talking myself and I keep trying to talk myself out of it, or I'm scared to do it, or I feel like people will laugh at me if I ask for that or whatever, if it keeps coming back up, then I take the action. But it's almost like I have to convince myself that the bold request is legitimate
Right.
before I do it.
Yeah, as if there was such a thing, right? Like, it's just, yeah, it's a funny how we filter even that. For me,
Yeah.
I totally get it. Yeah, yeah.
When you first started coaching, what was it that gave you? Hey, everybody, just a quick pause here to let you know how much I appreciate that you've made time for my podcast. If you're not already a subscriber, please become one today. Leave a review and tell a friend. Now, let's get back to the show. How did you get those how did you prospect, I guess? I mean, you said that you've taken us a little bit through it, but I don't think you said specifically how you prospect. And then what was your value proposition? Like, how did people, I mean, I know what your value proposition is, or I think I know what it is now, but back then, what was it that, you thought would resonate with someone and they would hire a guy that's just been, running sales and being a part owner of a family business
Well, I think,
and a musician?
yeah, well, there's a little more to that running that family business story that really is my unfair advantage in the
Tell
world.
it.
Yeah. So working with your entire family can create a lot of challenges, as you might imagine. A lot of big personalities in my family, and we worked well together, but we'd have these meetings and they would go horribly, and I mean horribly. And inevitably, my mom would end up being the referee between her kids and her husband. That happened almost every meeting. And so after one particularly tough meeting, my mom and I went out to lunch, and I said, "Mom, we got to do something here, because this is going to destroy our family. As strong as our family is, it can't withstand this kind of, challenges all the time." So I said, I believe we should try to get some support here. And she said, "Oh God, I've been thinking about that for a while." And so we just went back to everybody and said, "What would you think about working with, a counselor in our family dynamics?" And so I was really a little surprised, especially that one of my brothers agreed to it, because he was more resistant to that kind of work than the rest of us, but he agreed. And so for 7 years, Mike, my family had the love and the courage to carve out not only the time but the resources to get in a room at least once a quarter with our counselor and work our stuff out as a family. And it is by far the biggest gift I've ever been given, because I'm complete with all of my siblings and my parents, which is quite honestly very rare. And so when we went through bankruptcy, there was no blame. There was no one was pointing fingers. We were all in it together because of all the work we'd done. It was incredibly graceful how we navigated a very, very challenging time. And when my dad died in 2016, he was in hospice for the last 10 days of his life. And it was the best 10 days of my life because of how it went. The hospice workers told us that they'd never, ever heard so much laughter and singing coming out of one room ever from any of their patients. And it was 10 days of celebrating my dad's life instead of trying to clean our family shit up. We'd already cleaned it all up. And, I was doing a Visage talk a couple of years ago, and I, tell this story about that. And one of the Visage members said, I heard something about that recently. He said, "It's ironic you tell that story." He said, "I heard something that until you're complete with all your immediate family, you can never be fully expressed as a human being. There will always be something in the way of you being fully expressed." And I'm like, wow. I mean, I don't know that that's true, Mike. It rings true for me because I've been both incomplete and complete with my siblings and my parents. And I feel like I'm way more able to be fully expressed now that I'm complete with them. And so that was the backbone of my coaching. I mean, honestly, I spent so much time in that environment with a very gifted counselor that was essentially a coach, really, that I just gleaned a lot from her. She's amazing. She's a Samsonite, actually. Her name is 𝙁𝙤𝙧𝙚, She comes from the Samsonite family, which I never even knew, but that's a family business. She grew up in a family business. So she was really adept at navigating all the pitfalls and the challenges we had in our family system.
Well, I'm glad I asked the question, because that makes it click for me. Like,
yeah, I mean, almost everything that I talk about is experiential. I wouldn't get up and speak about anything I haven't been through myself. And and I think that's just the way I look at it. You know, I don't think I would be super keen on getting parental advice from somebody that doesn't have any kids. It wouldn't be my first go-to. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Yeah.
The 4 pillars, you mentioned them earlier. Let's walk through those, because I think they're super powerful, and they're like I think they're super powerful.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's important to lay the groundwork a little bit in that, you know, in my mind, we operate out of 2 very distinct mindsets as human beings. We're either immersed in the victim mindset or the ownership mindset. And, you know, I've spent a lot of time with human beings in every strata of the human experience. I've never once met a person that doesn't spend time in the victim mindset, and I don't believe I ever will, ever. And, you know, the victim mindset, how we get there is when we start reacting to life. That's when we enter the victim mindset. And you know, I'm 60 years old. I don't think that there's ever been more human beings immersed in the victim mindset than there have been in the last 28 months because of COVID. Oh my gosh, reacting to this virus up and down and up and down. And so what causes us to go to the victim side is reaction, but what keeps us in is fear. Fear just sucks us in and holds us in the victim side. And, you know, if you distill it down, it's pretty much always the same fear. And it's the one I've mentioned several times. That's the fear of not being good enough. That's the one that just disables human beings from taking action and playing a big game. And, you know, there's some big costs with the victim side. It's not wrong to be in the victim mindset. It's not bad or wrong. It's just not very fun. It's not very fun because we give up things. The things we give up, our energy drops right off a cliff when we enter the victim mindset.
Right.
Exhaustion is a great indicator of the victim mindset. If you feel like you're exhausted, that's the victim side. Our confidence tends to dissipate when we enter the victim mindset. We start languishing over decisions that we made easier the day before, the week before. Our performance also suffers mightily when we enter the victim mindset. You know, one of the indicators is babysitting and firefighting all day as a boss. That's incredibly draining. You're reacting all day long, and you're not probably creating any great results babysitting and firefighting all day long. So those are big costs. The biggest cost by far, Mike, is presence. You cannot be present and immersed in the victim mindset at the same time. And as far as I know, there's literally only one place that magic ever shows up as a human being. It's this moment. That's the only place I'm aware that magic ever shows up as a human being. And yet it's hard to be present. It is for me anyway. It's hard. There's a lot of stuff going on. I already said that preoccupation, distraction, they're just manifestations of fear. They are fear. And so, you know, that's a big killer. You know, I might have mentioned this in our talk just before I get to the ownership and the 4 pillars. One thing that might be useful for everybody on this phone call is I work in distressed marriages a lot as a coach. And the number one reason that couples are sitting across from me anyway, for sure, in my experience, the number one reason is a lack of trust. But it isn't a fidelity trust. It's a presence trust. That's by far the number one reason. And it's usually, if I'm being honest, it's usually the husbands that are distracted and preoccupied at home thinking about work. And how do I be even more enough at work in lieu of being present with my kids or my spouse? It's not always men. Certainly women can fall prey to preoccupation, distraction. But either way, it definitely destroys that connection. And so that's kind of the victim side in a very short, brief synopsis. On the other side is what I call the ownership mindset, and it's awesome. And, you know, how we get to the ownership mindset, Mike, is when we start actively creating our life. That's when we enter the ownership mindset. And I say that because we're born to create as human beings, at least in my experience. We're born to create. When we're creating, we're our highest self. And so, you know, when we enter the ownership mindset, so to speak, and we start actively creating our life, it makes sense. The first thing you notice, your energy is super high. A lot of times it's contagious, right? Have you been around somebody recently with contagious energy? Like, I want some of what they got.
Yeah, of course.
That's the ownership mindset. They're actively creating life in my perspective. And your confidence is really solid. It's not cocky. It's just solid and grounded. And of course, your performance follows suit. That's when we create our best results, is when we're actively creating our life. I think the biggest benefit is you're slowing down. You're way more present in not only with yourself, but your people you work with, the people you are in your houses with, and your spouse, your kids. It's super fun when you're coming from the ownership mindset, and so as we talked about in the talk that I gave for your Vistage group, I've distilled it down into 4 pillars of the ownership mindset. They're not the best pillars or the right pillars. They're just the ones I see. And those 4 pillars, the first one is love. The second one is purpose. The third one is presence. And the fourth one is personal responsibility. Love, purpose, presence, personal responsibility. Those are the 4 pillars of the ownership mindset as I see it. And so, I spent a lot of time talking about those 4 pillars, and that all got created during COVID.
The one of the most impactful things that I thought you said when you were talking to us was this notion of discretionary effort.
Yeah.
And can you talk about discretionary effort? Because I thought it was, it was kind of like, well, you basically talked about there's no such thing as a lack of energy in a person.
Yeah.
And then there's this thing called discretionary effort. And the I guess the point is, what do you need to do in order to earn the discretionary effort of someone else?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and just to be clear, I call it discretionary energy. Effort and energy are the same. So they're synonymous.
Okay. Well, I'm a sloppy note taker.
Well, that's okay. It's okay. And so I love what you said. So there's 3 major ways that we tend to pull the discretionary energy out of somebody else. And the 3 mechanisms by which, primary ones anyway, purpose, appreciation, and presence. Those are the 3 ways that we tend to pull the discretionary energy out of another human being. And, as it relates to purpose, a simple formula about purpose and discretionary energy is, the higher the purpose, the more willing I am to give something my discretionary energy. In other words, if I don't know why I'm doing something, it's very, very unlikely I'll give it my discretionary energy. I'll do enough to get by, don't get me wrong, but I'm not going to give it everything I got. And, so as you said, in my experience, there's no such thing as a lack of energy ever. What's missing is purpose. And I could show everybody that's listening on this phone call or this podcast how you've gone from completely exhausted to completely energized in exactly 1 second in your life based on one thing: purpose. And so maybe there's some parents on this phone call, and I'll just give you a quick scenario. Let's just assume you've had a really challenging day at work, and you come home and you're exhausted, and on this very rare day you have the opportunity to lay down on the couch and you're exhausted, and there's nothing that's going to get you off that couch. You're not moving, and you're laying there. Maybe your spouse comes up and says, "Hey, Mike, what are your thoughts for dinner?" Like, "Hey, honey, you're on your, I'm hanging. This is my resting place for the night." And you're laying there, Mike, but all of a sudden you hear a primordial scream come from the bedroom. It's one of your children. Now, you don't know what's going on, but by that scream it's bad. I mean, I very much doubt you'd have the thought, "You know what? I'm pretty exhausted right now. I'll go check on that when I have more energy." Right.
Yeah. Or I'll wait till I hear it again, because maybe I heard some. Yeah.
So what showed up is discretionary energy based on purpose, because it's very likely, if you're like, I don't know, most human beings, I would guess the well-being of your children is your highest purpose. Is that fair? And so there would be no way in your life you could ever show me an example where you wouldn't be willing to give your discretionary energy to children's well-being. Can't think of a scenario where that would happen. But, sometimes we can fall into the story, "I don't have the energy right now." You hear that one a lot, right?
Sure you do.
A couple of the common ones I hear Mike, one is, I literally had clients telling me this, God, Todd, I was so exhausted. I just didn't have the energy to call my distressed client back. I mean, it was 4:30 in the afternoon. It was when the call came, and I just didn't have the energy to call him back. So I just didn't call him back because I just exhausted. Another one is very likely that some of us on this phone call within the last month or so have walked in our front door, and right off the bat, we're greeted by our partner, our spouse, and by the look in their eye, you know one thing: they want to have a meaningful conversation. You know, the kind that actually create your marriage, that kind.
Sure.
And
Yeah,
you might have said, "Oh my God, honey, I'd love to have that conversation. I'm so tired. You know, can we just turn the TV on tonight?" And so you don't have that meaningful conversation. And some of us might have walked in our front door, been greeted by our 7-year-old who just wants to wrestle. And you look down and say, "God, but I'd love to wrestle, but I'm so tomorrow night we'll definitely wrestle." So you don't get on the floor and wrestle. And some of us have probably walked in our front door and looked at our running shoes and thought, "God, tonight's the night. I'm going to finally go for a run." And then you realize, "Oh, you know, I'm pretty exhausted. A beer sounds a lot better than that damn run. So I'm not going to, you know," so those are stories we can tell ourselves, but none of them are true. It's not energy that's missing, it's purpose. In other words, if retaining my client was a high enough purpose, I'd create the energy to call him back at 4:30, because if you wait overnight, you might not have a client in the morning. And you check out of enough meaningful conversations in your marriage, you're not going to have a partner anymore, you're going to have a roommate. And if you decide to not engage with your child, the thing about that one is your kids have no say in what version of mom or dad walks through that front door. But if you're believing the story, you don't have the energy tonight, they pay the biggest price. And you cannot get those moments back.
Yeah.
You know, and exercise, well, that's just it's a simple metaphor.
Just a short break here to ask you a question. Have you read my book? It's called Ownership: How Getting Selfish Got Me Unstuck, and it's available on Amazon, Audible, and everywhere else. If you're looking for inspiration that will help you unlock your greatness and potential, order or download your very own copy today.
Where I talk about exercise as a metaphor to just show how many times we can choose out of life by believing the story, "I don't feel like doing it," as if that mattered. You know, I exercise 4 or 5 days a week. You know when the last time I felt like exercising was, Mike? About
Never?
25 years ago. And
Yeah.
I never feel like it,
Right.
literally. But I got to trust one thing. I got to trust the moment I start pedaling, the feeling is going to show up. And so far, it's never failed me.
So one of the things that I wrote down that I think you said, and it goes along with what you were just talking about, was that no one ever got a feeling wrong.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
so I'm wondering how that squares up with what you just said, when someone says, "I don't feel like it."
yeah. So it's in a different context that
Okay.
it's okay. I mean, it's a big topic. I just don't want to, I mean, I don't know how much time we have left. That's a big conversation. Basically, what that was related to is that a lot of times we as human beings believe it's our job to change somebody else's feelings, specifically our
Oh,
kids.
yeah. Okay.
And I felt guilty of that. One of my children was distressed when he was a teenager, battled depression, and for a long time, I tried to change his feelings. And every time I tried to change his feelings, I made them wrong. And I added shame to his life. And I didn't have any idea that was going on. But then I went down, and that's where one of the biggest benefits from working with Steve Chandler, he said, I told him what was going on. He said, "Todd, I just, I have something to share because I've had a distressed child too." And he said, "I learned something, that no one ever got a feeling wrong." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "I mean, no one ever got a feeling wrong, Todd. How could anybody ever get a feeling wrong?" I'm like, huh, okay. And then he said, "Let me take a stab at something." He said, "Every time your son comes home and he's off, you try to change his feelings, don't you?" I'm like, "Oh my God, are you in my living room, my bedroom?" That's exactly what I've been doing. In other words, every time my son showed up and he was sad or off, I tried to show him all the reasons he had to be happy in his life and all the great things he had going on for him in his life. But the problem was, every time I did that, I made his feelings wrong. And so when I realized what was going on out of that conversation with Steve, I came home, and it wasn't maybe 4 days later, my son came home from school, and he was off. But on that day, I didn't try to change his feelings. I just got curious about him. And I kept asking the most powerful question I know to ask a human being: what else? I think I asked it like 3 times in a very brief conversation. And after about 20 minutes, out the door, he went to play with his buddies. Whereas before, that would have been a 2 or 3 day drama fest. You're trying to pull him out of that. And so I learned something in that very, very brief moment, that no one ever got a feeling wrong. It's not our job to change somebody else's feelings. That's their job. Our job is just to hold a loving space and give them the experience of being heard and understood. That's the best gift we can give them. And by the way, I've so far never met one person ever who successfully changed another person's feelings, ever.
Mm-hmm.
Never. Not once.
Have you ever met a person who's given another person purpose?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, I guess the birth of your children give you purpose, unwittingly or not, but there's a choice in having them, right? No, I don't know. I would say no. I don't think anybody's ever given another person purpose. I think that's up to us too. And, you know, one of the things that I hear a lot is I got to find my purpose. And I get that. But in my mind, it's not something you find, it's something you create through experimentation.
It's the action.
Yes, it's the action. It's
Yeah.
not something you find. You know, you can't find time. You cannot find purpose. You cannot find a relationship. You create all those things. They're not something you find. They're creations. And at least to me. And so I think purpose is one of those things that, you know, if you're not really cognizant of what your purpose is, or more importantly, if you're not living into it, which I didn't for only about 49 years, it's kind of a mess. I mean, the problem for me, and I get a lot of people listen to this, they literally might not know what their purpose is. I knew what my purpose was. I just didn't have the courage to step into it. So it was almost worse. I mean, I have a lot of compassion if you don't actually really know. I don't know what my purpose is. Like, I get that, but it's almost more of a nightmare when you know what it is and you don't have the courage to take the leap to go for it. That was horrible.
Yeah. That's like fear manifested, right?
Totally.
It
was all fear.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Mike, 100%. Yeah. So yeah, I love that note that if no one ever got a feeling wrong, it really literally transformed not only the relationship with my son, but I employ that every day as a coach, as a husband, as best I can. I'm not perfect at it. I do fall into the temptation, specifically with my wife, sometimes trying to change her feelings. That's usually met with dad coming back at me, by the way. It's never well. Yeah.
So Todd, where I want to end with you is this other amazing thing that you said, which was very paraphrasing, but there's very little capital T truth in the world.
Yeah.
And again, my notes might be a little sloppy on that, but what does that mean?
Well, you know, so I start every talk by just owning that I don't have the truth, because I don't. Not one thing I've said to date is the truth, other than the stories I've told. And I say that for a very specific reason, because, you know, in my experience, if you did a root cause analysis of the last time you got in a conflict in your life, either personally or professionally, what you'd most likely find is the root cause of that conflict is one or both of you thought you had the truth around something, as if it can only be this way. And the moment I walk into a meeting with my direct reports or my coworkers, or into my bedroom or my kitchen, and I vomit the truth on someone, something very predictable happens. A wall gets established, and all the love and affinity in that conversation goes right out the door, and it's usually backfilled by resentment and resistance. That's the impact that the truth has on a conversation. And you know, as you might remember, in my experience, there's almost no capital T truth. I'm not saying there's not any. I'm just saying there's very little. Now, there are millions of facts. There are bazillions of facts, but there's very little capital T truth. And in my experience anyway, and, you know, it's likely that some people on this call Mike, consistently believe that they have the truth in their life. They're what I call truth sayers. And they go around in their life, and everywhere they go, they have the truth. Doesn't matter what topic it is, and it doesn't matter. And they're so hard to be around.
Yeah.
Because the problem with having the truth, Mike, is you cannot have an open heart and an open mind and have the truth at the same time. They don't coexist. And I've never known of a bad outcome ever in my life. In any interaction I've ever had in my life, I've never known of a bad outcome when I come with an open heart and an open mind. But man, if I believe I have the truth, holy cow, watch what happens. You just shut people down. And so, it's a good question for everybody on this phone call, at least for me, is, am I that person? Do I believe I have the truth around almost everything? And who would I be if I didn't come with it? It's exhausting to have the truth. It's exhausting to always be right. And it's a fool's errand unless you like resentment and resistance. And, I'll lighten it up a little bit and give you an example how funny this can be. Like, so I live in Steamboat. I have 3 young adult children, and you might remember this story, but they're all in their early 20s, but 7 years ago, they were all teenagers, which was a really experience that only those with teenagers can embrace. And in the middle of that experience of having 3 teenagers at home, we had a pretty big tragedy hit our household. Our dishwasher broke, which is a pretty big deal for 3 teenagers.
Yeah.
So my wife and I live, in Steamboat. It's 3 hours north of Denver. So it took us 2 weeks to get that dishwasher in. And it was really exciting when we got it in. I mean, really excited. So exciting, in fact, that my wife and I, we got a bottle of wine out and we christened the damn thing. It was so exciting. I'm not kidding. We didn't break the bottle. We got it. It was so exciting. And it was exciting, Mike, right up to the 3rd night when I was loading it. And my wife came in, and she's a beautiful, amazing human being, but she shared with me that I wasn't doing it correctly. Apparently there's a truth around how to load a dishwasher. And so, as you might imagine, I wasn't too excited for her feedback that night. I didn't say, "Thanks, honey." That's not how that went. I think I remember doing this and something of that nature. That'll be the last time. I mean, I do load the dishes, but I do chuckle. Some of people on this phone call right now are saying, I was with him up to that point, but dude, there really is the truth around how to load a dishwasher. There's not.
That came up at my uncle's funeral. Actually, his son-in-law said something similar. How there was a way to load a dishwasher, his way.
His way. His way or the highway, as they say, right? Yeah. Awesome.
Well, that's a great place to leave off. That there's very little capital T truth. That really stuck with me, and I think that and even though I know that, I still get sucked into thinking I know the truth sometimes, Todd. And my wife usually calls me on it, and then I go, "Damn it!" Because I want to be right sometimes.
Of course. It's the big drug for humans, I think.
Yeah. So, listen, everybody, you've gotten a sense of the power that Todd has as a speaker, as a coach. I mean, these stories that he tells, there's no beating your chest. There's no raising your voice. There's none of that stuff. It's just so easy to listen to, but not just listen to it. So easy to grab great stuff from that. You can tell by that I've kept, over this year, and I will keep forever, because it just makes me a better person, a better leader, maybe even a better podcaster. I don't know, but Todd, thank you so much for being on the show. Is there anything you want to leave us with that before we hit the outro?
Oh gosh. I think the thing I would leave everybody with is the invitation to take stock of the difference that they make in other people's lives. Take one day and just notice all the people you touch in one day. And, my experience is a lot of us spend most of our day focused on what isn't working and how we're not enough. And I don't know about you, Mike, but one of the gifts that Steve Chandler gave me is the idea to create a folder where I keep emails and, texts from people that I've had some degree of impact on, and I have a folder of those. And whenever that little voice shows up, the one that says I'm not good enough, I pull that folder out and I'm like, hold on a minute, that isn't true. I have little evidence that I have had an impact. And so I would welcome everybody, if you've never created a folder like that, maybe today's the day to do that, and really just slow down and get what a difference you make. In a smile here, a gesture there, just a loving way of being. And I guess my final charge again is, what if you chose love over fear 10% more often? Who would you be then?
Right.
Because you can.
Thank you for leaving that with us, Todd.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Mike.